Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about reshaping America in the early 1800s, Lesson 2, Texas and the Mexican-American War. With American expansionists seeking new territory in Mexico and control of most of the land to the south and west, conflict between the two nations seemed almost inevitable. The catalyst for conflict became Texas. In time, that conflict would lead to a war that would vastly increase the size of the United States. This is all of what we're going to be talking about today is the lead up to the Mexican-American War. Of all the Mexican provinces, Texas was the most vulnerable to U.S. expansion. Offering abundant, fertile land, Texas lay closest to the United States, and it had only a small Hispanic population known as Tejanos to defend the province. In 1821, only about 4,000 Tejanos lived in Texas. So, of all the Mexican-owned land at this time, Texas is going to be the most vulnerable because it was right along the border of the United States. So, and if we think back, we know that Texas was very sparsely populated. It says here, in 1821, only about 4,000 Tejanos lived in Texas. And if we think back to the last section we were talking about, one of the reasons for that would have been all of the raiders from the Native Americans. To develop and defend the province, Mexico adopted a risky strategy. It agreed to allow Americans to settle in Texas. In return for cheap land grants, Americans had to agree to become Mexican citizens, to worship as Roman Catholics, and to accept the Mexican Constitution, which banned slavery. So, Mexico saw that they were going to be in a bad situation. They knew that Americans wanted Texas. So instead of trying to keep them out, they said, why don't we invite them in? And if we invite them in and say that they have to become Mexican citizens, they have to take on our religion and follow our laws, well, maybe they'll just join us. Maybe they won't want to fight us, they won't try to take it over, and they'll just come in, assimilate to our rules, and we won't have any conflict. Americans who were granted permission to settle the land and attract other colonists were known as empresarios. Mexico hoped this strategy would convert American settlers from a potential threat to an economic asset. So, they knew that American settlers were going to be a threat. However, if we can get them in and have them follow our rules, maybe this threat will become an asset. It'll become something good for us. So we're going to see how that played out for them. Led by Stephen F. Austin, American immigrants began to settle east of San Antonio, founding the town of Austin. Like settlers on other frontiers, these newcomers sought the economic opportunity of good farmland in large portions, mostly coming from the southern United States. They raised corn, pigs, cattle, and cotton. So they wanted all of this good farmland that was in Texas because it was very flat, very fertile, and ideal farmland. By 1835, Texas was home to about 30,000 American settlers known as Anglo-Texans. They outnumbered Tejanos by about 6 to 1. So what that means is that for each Tejano, there were 6 of these Anglo-Texans. So they were vastly outnumbering the original occupants, the original Mexicans that were there. Poor relations with the Mexican government. Relations between Anglo-Texans and the Mexican government soured by 1830. The settlers had not honored their part of the bargain. So the settlers that had been invited in to follow these rules and procedures were going against the rules. And this is going to start a problem with the Mexican government. They remained Protestants and ignored Mexico's slavery ban by smuggling in enslaved African Americans. Remember, the Mexican Constitution banned slavery. So, part of the rules was if they came in to settle in Texas, they couldn't have any slaves. But these people were sneaking in their slaves to work their farms. In turn, the Anglo-Texans felt dismayed by the unstable Mexican government, which suffered from military coups. Now, if you're wondering what a coup is, A military coup is something that happens whenever a government leader rises up, or a military leader, excuse me, gets all the military together and rises up and takes over the government for themselves. That's a military coup. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. In 1834, the charismatic but ruthless general Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna seized power in Mexico City. This was one of those military coups. Santa Anna favored a centralized authoritarian government dominated by the military. His coup troubled those liberal Mexicans who preferred a decentralized federal system like that of the United States. Santa Anna's rule especially angered the people of Texas, both Anglo-Texans and Tejanos, who wanted greater autonomy or independent control over their own affairs. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to not be reliant on the Mexican government. They wanted to do their own thing. Texas wanted to be independent from Mexico. One Anglo-Texan protested that Santa Anna would give liberty to our slaves and make slaves of ourselves. So, this Anglo-Texan is upset that Santa Anna wants to free the slaves, but also exert more control over them. That's what it means by give liberty to our slaves and make slaves of ourselves. Okay, let's take a look at this map. It says Empresario land grants in Texas, 1820s to 1830s. So this is the area of land that were granted to Americans. And it says, in which regions of Texas did Americans develop the most influence? Well, it's going to be this area right here. Because if you remember a few slides back, it said that they were led by that, let's see, what was his name again? Stephen Austin, and they settled the town of Austin. So right here is where they're going to have the most influence. So this area right through here, because it's right on the border with land that was American. Texas declares their independence. In 1835, the Texans rebelled against Mexican rule. They seized the Mexican garrisons at Goliad and San Antonio. A year later, the Texans declared their independence and adopted a republican constitution. Their new nation became known as the Lone Star Republic because of the single star on its flag. To crush the rebellion, Santa Anna led his army north into Texas. So, the Tejanos and the Anglo-Texans are coming together to rebel against Mexican rule. They want to be independent. They want to do their own thing. Santa Anna isn't going to have this, and he leads his army north into Texas to crush this rebellion. Well, in March 1836, his forces attacked a small Texan garrison at the Alamo, a fortified former mission in San Antonio. After 12 days of cannon fire, Mexican troops overran the walls of the Alamo. Refusing to keep prisoners, Santa Anna ordered the defenders slaughtered. The victims include Anglo-Texans Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett, as well as a dozen Tejanos. So, the Alamo is one of those famous battles in history, and we are going to see in the next video some of the ramifications, like what happened after the Alamo. So that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, send me a message through Schoology or email, and I'll get back to you real soon. So, alright, thank you for watching. Bye.